Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy. In this video, I'll show you how to use an arpeggiator on drum instruments in Logic to create some really cool drum grooves. So this is a technique that I used on one of my Mayday Children songs called Rhythm of Your Soul. I released this back in 2014. I sampled 4 different toms on a drum kit and then loaded those toms into the EXS-24 and used the arpeggiator to create this drum groove in the verses of the song. Here in Logic, I've got another example. This has an 8th note triplet feel. So I've got some synths in there too. There's this bass jumping around with an arpeggiator on octaves. And then I've got this ambient effect that I'm creating with the ES2 and 2 aux tracks. And what I've done is manually created a feedback effects loop. If you want to learn more about how to create this effect, check out my previous video on this topic. But here's what this sounds like by itself. So if I mute all the synthesizers and just solo out the drums, here's what it sounds like. So I've got some reverb in there. I'm going to mute that for now. Here's the kick drum. The snare's just on 3. So no arpeggiator there. On the toms, I have the same sort of 8th note triplet groove. But it's actually a different groove than the kicks. And putting these two on top of each other creates sort of like, not really a polyrhythm, but just 2 interlocking grooves. And then I've got the hi-hat in there as well. So I'm not going to show you how to do all 3 of these. I'll just show you how to do the kick, and then you can apply the same process to the toms and to the hi-hats. So on my kick track, I'm just going to reset the whole channel strip and start from scratch. A big thanks to AUBIT Sound for sending over their entire sample pack collection for me to try out. They have all sorts of samples and loops and preset packs, and at reasonable prices too. So for this video, I used the Ultralenium Drums and Effects Pack for all of the drum sounds. You can check them out at aubitsound.com, and I'll leave a link to their site in the video description below. So the first thing we need to do is build the instrument. And if you're going to work with an arpeggiator on drums, you want to load in all of your same sample types into one instrument, meaning that you want one instrument with all kicks, another instrument with all toms, another instrument with all snares, all hi-hats. You don't want to build a playable kit using the GM MIDI drum map, for example. That's just not going to sound good. You want to load in same types of samples into your sample instrument so that you can use them and layer them in the groove like I did here. So I'm going to use the EXS-24, but you can really use any drum sampler. I'm just going to load up the EXS-24 here on my empty channel strip, click the edit button, and then I'll load in all of my Ultralenium kicks here. So there's 25 of them. So just hit Command A to select all, drag them all in here. Now, normally I'd use the auto map or the drums map option when I'm building a typical drum kit, but for this, I want 1 sample per key moving chromatically up the keyboard starting on C1. And what this does is it builds a sample map and maps each of the samples chromatically starting on C1. So I can play these on my MIDI controller if I want. So a whole bunch of different kicks to pick from. One thing I want to do real quick is I want to select all of these samples, move over here to the playback column, and turn off the pitch option but I do want to keep the one-shot option on. So pitch is going to pitch shift these if you move them up or down. It's not really going to have too much of an effect right now because the root key and the key range are the same. When they're the same, you're not going to get any pitch shifting, but if you went in here and tried to move these around, you would hear a pitch shift. So I generally turn this off with drums. And then I generally turn on one shot because what this does is it allows you to quickly press the key, but hear the entire sample. So you don't have to hold the key down in order to hear the whole sample. So if I turn this off for this sample, watch what happens. If I don't hold the key down, I don't get the whole sample. So if I check that, I can just quickly tap the note and I'll still get the full sample length. Next, I'll just save this instrument. So I'll just go up to Instrument, Save As. If you want this to work in all of your Logic sessions, not just this one, make sure to save the instrument under your Mac username, under Music, Audio, Music Apps, and then Sampler Instruments. And I'll call this Ultralineum Kicks 2, since I already have an Ultralineum Kicks patch that I created before. Hit Save. And now what I can do is, even if I clear this channel strip, I can load up the EXS24 again. And right here, you can load up that instrument that we just created. And it loads up all those samples. So the next thing you have to do is pick a few samples that you want to work with. In particular, I liked the first 3. And I try to pick ones that don't all sound the same. And what you want to do is layer all of those instruments starting at the very beginning of the region here and stretch them out as long as you want them to cycle for. So I did this 8 bars at a time. So I created these little 8-bar loops with all 3 of those notes in them. What I also did is I varied the velocity a bit. So you can see that this middle sample on C sharp is a little louder than C1 or D1, because I want to hear that one a bit more pronounced when it cycles through the arpeggiator. So right now, if I just play this, you're just going to hear all 3 samples at the same time. Nothing special. But if I throw the arpeggiator on my MIDI effects on the channel, I can start to get some groove out of this. So that's a 16th note pattern. And just like if you're arpeggiating chords, you can pick from the different note directions here. So there's up, down, up and down. And then there's a down, up without the repeated note. But you can also adjust the variation. So let's try variation 2. Variation 3. So when I was editing the video, I realized I forgot to mention something. Make sure to turn on your metronome while auditioning these different grooves and variations. This will help you to hear where the downbeats are. Sometimes the variations and note directions can sound the same without the metronome, but with the metronome in, you can hear where the downbeat is, so it gives you sort of like a beat reference, and you'll hear the accented notes on different subdivisions of the beat. So the groove is like sort of shifting to different places, but without the metronome for reference, you won't know what's a downbeat and what's an upbeat or what's a subdivision. Now, if you play with the octave range, essentially what you're doing is you're going to be hearing more samples that are up an octave or so from these initial samples. For drum instruments, unless you've got like 3 or 4 octaves worth of samples loaded into your sampler, going up to the 3rd and 4th octave range really isn't going to do anything. But if you go up to the 2nd octave range, this will use other samples on C2, C sharp 2, and D2. Now you can also change the groove. I said earlier that this song's got more of a triplet feel. So I'm going to go down to 8th note triplet. So let's go with that. Let's layer it with the snare. Sounds kind of weird. Let's layer it with the toms. And then the hi-hats. Let's try the up-down variation instead. Yeah, that fits really nicely into the groove of all the other drums. So I basically did that same thing. I went through that whole process with the toms and the hi-hats. For the snare here, it didn't really matter because I'm not using the arpeggiator at all. But what I also did is I added some reverb to all of the drums on bus 1 here and added like a real sort of distant ambient drum verb. So that's how you can use arpeggiators with drum instruments in Logic Pro 10. To vary your patterns, you can try picking different notes in the piano roll editor. You can vary the velocity of the notes in different ways, and you can also vary the pattern and note direction in the arpeggiator. You can also try reordering the samples in the sampler itself so that your primary samples are on the bottom or on the bottom note. In my case, this was C1. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a like and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. Again, a big thanks to AUBIT Sound for letting me check out their entire sample library. Thanks for the support, and thanks for watching.